You're listening to the Penteract Poetry Podcast, hosted by Anthony Etherin.
Okay, this is episode 30, and I'm talking to Sacha Archer. Hello.
Hey.
I like to start these with the stock question of why are you a poet? It's been pointed out to me that the better question is why would anyone continue to be a poet? But I am interested in the origin. What made you decide to do this?
Yeah, I like the second question better, but how it all began. Really, I don't know exactly. I mean, the timeline gets confused when I try to remember and put it together, because I remember writing at a fairly young age. Specifically, I have an image of myself in a forest walking around and just writing about the things around me. And like my grandmother was a librarian, so I grew up around books and being read to constantly. But yeah, exactly what drew me to poetry, I don't remember. Though I remember later on in high school, at that time, I didn't think of myself as a writer or a poet, despite having done some writing. But then, yeah, one day I just walked into a used bookstore and grabbed a copy of Sylvia Plath's Ariel from the shelf, and I had no idea what it was. No one had directed me to that book or anything. It was just, here's a shelf of poetry, and I probably didn't even open it up and read any of them because, I don't know, I always feel strange reading in bookstores for some reason. I feel like pressured. I just don't have like the leisure.
I know what you mean.
It's like,
yeah,
I also don't really like libraries, which is terrible. I wish I did. But I've just never been able to get into a comfortable place where I'm like, oh, good, I can pick up this book and sit down and read it. And I don't know, it just doesn't happen for me. So yeah, probably I went into this bookstore, picked up the book, probably didn't read any of it, and then took it home and opened it up, and that just like cracked it wide open. As a teenager, probably going through some pretty rough times, I needed an outlet, whether I knew it or not, and that just, yeah, that work was amazing and totally opened the door for me. So that's the most concrete example of an entrance, though I'm sure I was writing before that, as I said.
Yeah, well, that's good luck finding that book. Of all the books you picked up, to find something that is
right
that amazing, so good. So, but you're known as a visual poet primarily. So, were you also a visual artist? Were you also experimenting in that area?
Yeah, I've always moved between visual, the written word, and music. I was, I guess, mainly thinking of myself as a musician when I was in high school. I played guitar, or I still play guitar, and I played it intensely all the time, wrote music, brought it around with me everywhere. Didn't want to go to university, wanted to just go out into the world and make music.
I can relate to this. You can see that my bass guitar is right behind me. Yeah, exactly the same for me.
Yeah, and then later in university, I just didn't have the space to, or the privacy to sit and write music. And so it kind of just gave way to, well, I don't know, maybe a black hole for a little while until I really re-entered things. And then I was doing a lot of painting, a lot of writing, but they were at that time quite separate. And then, I don't know, somewhere along the way, I got introduced to visual poetry. How? Maybe Ubu Web? Maybe. because it certainly wasn't through the classes I was taking.
No, it was quite a difficult thing to find.
Mm-hmm.
Normally need someone to tell you about it directly. Well, I'm interested, just going back to what you said, for me, it was at university where I switched from music to literature. And that was largely because all the bands that I was playing in fell apart. And it was just so tempting to do something where I didn't have to work with other people. I could just do my own thing. Did you have any experience like that, or were you more of a solo?
For sure, but less with music. Like with music, like I said, it was more just having that space and privacy where I could concentrate and compose. That was taken away for a while, long enough to force me to shift. But also later on, like late university, when I had been oscillating between painting and drawing and then poetry, there was a couple times when a lot of my work got discarded. Like one time I moved away from a place and then I didn't like have a place to take all the work, so I left it there just thinking like I knew the people who lived there, so I thought it would just kind of sit there, but eventually it just got like thrown out, and that was fine. I wasn't like totally crushed, but and then it happened again. I went to New Brunswick at some point and made a whole bunch of work out there, and then I had to leave quickly because I found out my mom had cancer, and so I just abandoned all that work there, and it, I assume, got thrown out. Actually, the person who I was staying with passed away not too long ago, so whatever happened to the work, I don't know. It's all gone. Lots of goneness. As things like that kept on happening, I just got tired of the space that visual art can take up and that I often don't have. So that relates to what you were saying, I think.
It does. Yeah. Well, the first time I heard of you was when Derek Ballou gave me a pamphlet he'd made, a beautiful stitched pamphlet of your the dishwasher. Yes.
Right.
So this is, you're translating the dishwasher into English. Is that a good way to describe it?
That was when I was living in China, and it was like I was washing dishes by hand, and I don't know where I got the idea, but yeah, I put on the voice recognition program, which would just pick up the sounds that I was making and make what it could of them into Microsoft Word. So it, like, I was just doing, I was just washing the dishes and it was doing the work. Yeah.
It's a great idea. And I mean, this is something about your practice that's quite amazing. You are constantly trying to do new things.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I mean, this is really the main thing I want to talk to you about, because there's a theme on this podcast of discussing what it means to be avant-garde, if you even like phrases like avant-garde, and how avant-garde works sit in relation to more traditional work. So I know you've said some things to me in the past about the type of work that is called avant-garde and how a lot of it actually isn't that, I don't want to get you in trouble, how it isn't that progressive necessarily, and how actually a lot of stuff these days that's called avant-garde is from traditions that have existed for 50, 70, 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you always seem to be on the lookout for new things that poetry can be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, well, for one thing, we're seeing the popularization of quote unquote avant-garde works, right? Insofar as like that is becoming a standard, right? I think that's what I've seen. Certainly people are still writing, recognizable free verse and whatever. everything's still being written, but it does seem that a lot of things that are winning awards and stuff, and what people who are well known, it's more what we'd call avant-garde, which kind of makes it moot, right? Like the idea of avant-garde. Plus, yeah, a lot of stuff that's put forward as avant-garde just simply isn't. It's just like a lot of the stuff that I do, though I do try to find things that are surprising to me and ways that I can express ideas that I see as an extension of writing. Stuff like my rubber stamp poems, I don't see them as avant-garde at all. I see them as rather conservative. And like, I'm okay with that. You know, I don't need to impress anyone with being avant-garde. It's just, you know, work that I'm trying to achieve something through some medium, you know.
Yeah, well, these are two very good points, because a lot of things, and we can look at just visual poetry, but this applies to every area of poetry. You can look at something like typewriter-based poems and think, well, typewriter poetry has been around since the invention of the typewriter. It's not, there's not anything radical about making patterns on the typewriter. But then the second point, as you say, is, well, that's okay. It's okay to do traditional work within an established medium. So there's nothing wrong with making typewriter poems. But it's strange how some things are considered to belong to avant-garde traditions. I mean, the example I could bring up from my own practice, which is really weird, is that if I write a palindrome, it's considered avant-garde. If I write a sonnet, it's considered conservative. Well, palindromes have been around a lot longer than sonnets.
Right.
So what's the rules here?
Yeah, I feel like it's a time that we need to resituate our ideas of, you know, what is avant-garde, and like, I mean, I think you said traditional. You said the word traditional in regards to like typewriter poems, right? And it's like, it's true. There's these very solid traditions now of many forms that would not too long ago have been considered avant-garde, or at least experimental. Yeah,
so things get bracketed as experimental because of their tradition. So there's this huge irony. Do you like the term avant-garde, or do you think
I like the sound of it? I like the sonic sound of it. I'm just trying to think of like what avant-garde actually is supposed to be and what I associate it with, and what an avant-garde might be trying to accomplish by like I think of radicalism. That would be like the most important concept of an avant-garde. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it means, because it's a military term, isn't it? So it means to effectively be willing to go out and get shot down because you're trying something for the first time and you're willing to fail. So I guess that's the same thing.
Right. So like there's also like an association sort of violence. And I don't know if that's because of what we know, you know, early data work, which, you know, reveled in chaos and you know, like the classic scene at the Cabaret Voltaire, and you know, and like ideas of riots and shit like that, you know, which is like hilariously unimaginable now. So it's funny to see, you know, the term avant-garde tossed around very lightly, and yeah, I don't know. I feel like it just doesn't. It's just not relevant.
Yeah, if it's work that isn't afraid to be hated, then I think, well, any artist should be doing that. Any artist should be making something, not knowing how people are going to respond to it, and not knowing if people are going to hate it and hate you for making it. So maybe we don't need it. It's a bit like experimental too as applied to art. I mean, in a way, every poem is an experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny. I just saw you did a tweet saying that. Just saw.
I did.
Yeah.
It's obviously on my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not going to say I disagree. It's just a slippery slope, you know. Like any art form contains some form of risk because, like, unless you're, I guess, if you're doing a still life, you have the thing there and you're just trying to replicate that. But if you're creating something without a referent, there's always that risk, you know, that I think I remember like Anne Carson saying something about, like, the thing about poetry is that it's all falling, you know. That's a very general paraphrase, but there's always that sense of stepping out into the unknown, like whatever form you're pursuing. So I agree. Yes, all poems are to some degree an experiment.
But I am also, I suppose, I'm wrong in the sense I've oversimplified, because some things are more of an experiment than others. Some things are riskier than others. But you mentioned your rubber stamp poems, and you feel that that's a safer thing to do than some of the other things you've done, for example. And I could certainly point to things in my own practice where I know I'm not taking as much of a risk compared to other works.
Well, probably when I first started doing them, you know, it had more risk. Well, I don't know, because like they're incredibly frustrating, and you know, I've been working on a new collection, and it's been equally as frustrating as the last one. So like obviously I haven't settled down into some learned routine, but I just feel there's more of a recognizable tradition behind it. Whether or not like that doesn't make it easier for me to make it, you know, but it might be easier for people to recognize it, right?
Well, that's true. But so is that important to you then, that you
No.
would like to see things, you'd like to make things that people really haven't seen before, even in their form?
No, I just want to work in a way that makes me excited, you know. It makes me feel like I'm creating something, whereas like when I'm making this new collection of rubber stamp work, you know, it feels known, even though I'm doing new stuff, and it's quite different than the first one. But yeah, it's known territory. I like the unknown territory, and there's that like idea or feeling of beginner's luck. You know, I like beginner's luck, and trying to find that in different places. And it's hard to have beginner's luck with the known.
No, I know exactly what you mean. There's a really different feeling of working within an established form and taking that leap into something no one's tried before. I think they're both satisfying.
Definitely. I mean, this summer I went back to writing just like a whole bunch of free verse poems, you know, and because I just wanted to get back to some basic writing. And it was great and challenging and disappointing. It still had risk involved. It still had its successes that seemed fresh, even though that, you know, might be just an illusion. But in the end, I had like, let's say 50 poems. And I really just felt in the end like, okay, I did that. And there were some really good ones, I thought, and I tried out different methods and different voices came in, but in the end, like, I didn't have that same sense of satisfaction. I was like, okay, well, that's done, and I don't even know that I want to publish these. There's something kind of embarrassing about them, but ultimately just dissatisfying, because I would just later on look at them and be like, okay, yeah, that's been said, or that could be said better, which would just be my failing as a poet. I don't know.
Something that isn't talked about enough, I think, is the idea that you don't have to publish everything. You know, you don't have to publish every poem you write. You don't have to intend to publish a poem when you sit down to write it. You could just write for the pleasure of writing. There's always this idea that, well, this has got to be a finished work I can place somewhere.
Yeah, and I kind of envy that, because I don't publish a lot of stuff. I have years of work that is unpublished, and like I've been revisiting some of it, which is fun, but I can't imagine having, you know, like just making stuff and just publishing that. That's incomprehensible to me, but I guess people do it to the detriment of the rest of us.
Yeah, I think perhaps to some extent I've fallen into the trap of always writing things and knowing what they're intended for. And I'd like to go back to just messing around a bit more and not thinking this is a poem for this project.
So I was just insulting you. People like Anthony write their poems, they publish each one, and we all moan. Just kidding. Just kidding.
I'll allow it.
So basically everything you write goes into your books?
Oh no, not at all.
No,
because obviously they're a failed experiment. They're bad poems, right. So they don't see the light of day.
Yeah.
But when I sit down to write, generally I'm thinking, okay, this is a poem for this thing, this project I'm working on, which I intend to publish at some point. And maybe that poem fails, so then I turn my attention to a different poem from that same suite of poems.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean.
But if we compare like your constrained work with if we just look at the rubber stamp work, they're both very different architectures, right? And like, as I'm thinking of like throwaway works, I'm thinking of an architect, you know, and an architect goes out and like obviously plans are made, but like there aren't throwaway works, right? They don't like start building a place and like, oh fuck, this just wasn't what I thought. Let's abandon it. I mean, stuff's abandoned, but that's usually just because of money. But the constraints that you begin with, I feel, create a more definite path to a success. Whereas a lot of my rubber stamp work, which is like just totally on the fly, right? Like I just started something, I'm just like, oh fuck, it's like it just fucking failed, it's crumpled up, gone.
I see. Yeah, I often think of this. I think of this with visual poetry. It's one of the most important things. One of the most important skills a visual poet can have is knowing what to keep and what to throw out.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, could you? It's a bit of a difficult question, but could you put some rough percentage on that? What percent do you think you keep, and what do you discard?
Maybe I'm being generous, but maybe I keep like 30%. And then also I'll keep failed works, and I'll blend works together. I'll like either cut them up or cut them up digitally and put them together, see if they can work off of one another. So that's a whole different thing. But yeah, I think 30% sounds about right.
Okay, so let's look at. Well, we'll have to talk about Mother's Milk anyway, because this has been a big success for you, and it is one of your rubber stamps. So a book like that, you'd say that there are probably 3 books there, reduced down to 1.
Yeah, well, like there's like the works that just got crumpled up and thrown out, and I don't know how many of those there are. And then there's pieces that like were completed and were okay enough to have made it into the original submission, but there was some constraints with length just due to finance. So it was cut down from the original submission, which is great. You know, like that was a wonderful thing because it became a way stronger manuscript. And then I would probably never publish those poems. I would never think of publishing those poems that didn't make it in, because like if they weren't good enough, if they didn't make the cut, why would I pursue them later?
Yeah. I mean, well, at the risk of asking a very dangerous question, do you often look back at your books and think, I wish I hadn't put that in, or I wish I just done this bit differently? Because it seems like you're quite obsessive and you like to tinker with things.
Mm-hmm. I think I was like pretty damn satisfied with Mother's Milk. And it becomes a thing of itself also after the fact. Like, it's no longer mine. Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of any like regrets with books I've done. And I think I'm just getting better and better at knowing what I'm looking for, what I'm trying to express. No, I don't look back. I haven't had much regret with books. You know, like, oh, that was a bad decision. I mean, I haven't had a lot of very long works, and something that's so nice about the chapbook, rather than the full length, is that you can like really focus on creating this incredibly solid, self-contained idea.
Oh, definitely.
With less chance of error, right? And like there's less room for tangents. So yeah, it's like sort of diamond work, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, going forward, I'm thinking of focusing a lot more on shorter works where we can almost memorize the whole thing and hold the whole thing as one object in your mind, where all the poems relate to each other in some way.
Yeah, the only drawback with the chapbook is that nobody buys them.
Yeah, that's a problem. And they should, because they're often better than long books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, like, I know that I've done quite a few chapbooks, and I often wonder, like, is there a way that I can collect these into a longer book, you know? And that's something totally foreign to me. Like, I don't know, do people do that? Do they just, like, stick this stuff together? Does that make sense? It would be nice because people do buy longer works, and if you could like get the stuff out there instead of like disappearing after 40 copies, right?
I'm sure if you published a long book which was, you know, which admitted this is 5 chapbooks sewn together somehow, or thrown together, I think people would still buy it the way they buy more coherently linked full-length collections.
Yeah.
So why not? But you know, I like variety anyway in poetry collections. I think a huge collection of poems that are just doing the same thing isn't as interesting to me.
Yeah, and I mean, generally, an artist's oeuvre has like one theme running through it, right? Or at least like some consistent route.
Yeah, and in fact, it's a gift that we do this anyway. We can't help but do this. You know, we're at the mercy of our unconscious. We have to.
Right.
We will continually bring up the same themes and the same small structural patterns throughout what we do.
Yeah.
So actually, while we're talking about chapbooks, now's a good time, I think, to mention your latest, Jung Origami.
Yeah. Right. So I mean that this is an interesting project to bring up with what we were saying a little while ago about like talking about avant-garde and tradition and stuff. And that was very new to me, this process of using the scanner as a tool and getting the papers that have letters printed or stamped on them and crumpling them up, and it was very physical. It was almost more like playing an instrument, a musical instrument, in how much my body was involved in crafting these, because it was in motion. But it wasn't something that was absolutely new. I mean, photocopy, using the photocopier to create concrete poetry is not new, right? Like a scanner photocopier, basically the same. Also, if you're connected with John M. Bennett on social media, you'll see him constantly post crumpled paper scanner works. Significantly different than what I did with Jung Origami. But I mean, people do this. It's not coming out of nowhere. So I guess I'm just trying to like beat back some idea of originality, but I don't think that lessens the value of the work.
Not at all, and everyone should buy it. Well, when I think of your work, and if I had to choose what I think is probably your most radical work, it would be the event poems.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen anything quite like that.
But again, coming from other traditions, you know, like the happening, not a poetic tradition per se, but yeah.
Could you describe the event poems first? And when we post this podcast, I'll include the YouTube links because they are essentially video poems.
Yeah. Event poems are a way for me, like I wanted to do something live, something with people, something with action, and for me it is an extension of concrete poetry. There's a certain logic that I try to follow, like when I'm doing readings, I'm going through anthologies, I'm looking at the work, and I'm trying to find where certain lines are, like where something could stop being a poem based on the evidence of what I've seen. And so, for instance, where does some more traditional idea of concrete poetry, which we might say is like Eugene Gomringer, where does, in the evolution of concrete poetry, that become a semic writing? And then if a semic writing can be a branch of concrete poetry, there we're looking at gesture. If you put the gesture into the body, does it stop then? It's like it's no longer writing, or like, you know, so it's like I try to translate these certain logical steps, and then you can really just go on forever, right? And so yeah. The event poem is just this manifestation of the concrete poem in situ, like in person, right?
Yes, I think something like dancing is the human body acts as a glyph.
Yeah,
and dancing sure. is writing.
Exactly. Right, and like the idea of even just like the letter, you know, and like you could create some imagined letter. So if we can use ink and make a fairly random sign and say like this is a semic writing, then why can't we just use an object?
So it's fascinating, and I think this is, like I say, it's the most radical thing you've done out of a lot of radical things. So it's exciting stuff.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, because I don't hear a lot back about the event poems, and I haven't done a whole lot of them. And then, you know, especially because the pandemic landed, any plans or ideas I had were completely stalled.
Yeah, but the problem with the poems that need participation.
Yeah. Yeah. But I find the event poems very hard because I feel like they can become really cheesy really easily.
Okay.
I hope that I've avoided, in what way? Just ideas that I don't really know how to explain it. Maybe they just seem, the word that comes to mind is facile, but it's just hard for me to get like a good image, and I don't know. It's just hard for me to come up with them. You know, I've had lots of ideas, and then when I like really put a lot of thought into that idea, the more I see it, the more I think like, oh, that's just kind of almost cliche, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a totally different realm of work that I haven't had a lot of experience in.
And it's very conceptual. You know, the concept is it's mostly a conceptual form of concrete poetry. We've talked in the past about certain types of visual poetry and the relationship between the concept and the aesthetic dimension, the purer aesthetic dimension. Does it look good? And with some works, you've said that no matter the concept, it still has to be aesthetic. It still has to have, the work still has to have that dimension to it. Surely it is a balance that sometimes the concept is more important than the physical appearance, and sometimes the opposite.
I still want the reading experience, in whatever form that takes, to be entertaining. If something is boring, it doesn't matter how conceptually interesting it is. And I like the experience of reading and or viewing or whatever, right? Like of being engaged in the work, but on a physical level. And reading is a very physical thing. So while I appreciate the idea behind something, it's just not going to be able to carry me to an appreciation of the work unless somehow my body is engaged in some weird balance of intellectual and entertainment. And that makes sense. I think for me, like, I mean, poetry was originally always entertainment. It's just absurd now because who the fuck would go to poetry for entertainment when offered Netflix and, you know, Pornhub and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
So it's in this weird space of an intellectual pursuit rooted in entertainment.
Yeah, it's a good answer, and it's because it's something I think about with constraints. That how many constraints can I apply to a poem? Well, as many as I can still write a good poem with. You know?
Mm-hmm.
There's no point in doing something that obeys all these rules and is completely unreadable. I mean, I think a couple of times I've gone close to that, but I still try to make it as lyrical as it can be. And I suppose that's analogous to what you're saying, if we look at form as a concept.
Well, like, for instance, I did a chapbook through the blasted tree called Ummo. And it's an erasure of a children's book. And it follows a constraint, the prisoner's constraint. So there can be no letters with ascenders or descenders. And so all those words that had ascenders or descenders were excluded. And to perform the text is really enjoyable, and I know that the audiences who have seen me perform it have greatly enjoyed it. But to buy the text, then the reader has to bring that same amount of energy to it, right? Or it becomes pretty flat and boring. And so that's hard for the publisher. They're like, I don't know how many people have bought the chapbook. I hope many, but that's like a weird in-between place where it's like, how much is the reader supposed to bring to it? How much will they bring to it? How much faith do we have in an ideal reader?
Yeah, well, this is true of any poem.
Yeah, but some it's, I think, more relevant than others. I mean, if I read a poem by Seamus Heaney, I just don't feel like I don't need to bring too much to it, right? Like I can just read the poem and it's there and it's saying what it's saying and it is what it is. It's good, or it doesn't affect me, or it does, whatever. But then there's some poems that, like, unless you really put yourself in there, it's just going to be like just dead on the page.
And it's funny because we never know how people read our poems. The poet.
Wouldn't that be great? I would love to know how people see my work or read my work. That's the one thing you never get.
Yeah.
And that whole independent life that it gets.
Okay, well, we should, because we've been talking about your poetry, but you also publish, and Simulacrum publishes, or would you define it as a micropress? As we're talking about terms, do you like that term?
I do, because I mean, when we talk about small press, that it's just the gaps between different presses are too huge. You know, like it's something like Coach House Books is a small press.
A big small press.
Yeah, it's quite a big small press, right? Like or Book Hug. Things like that, and like that has no resemblance to Simulacrum Press, or it's like Michael Castile's in Kingston doing Puddles of Sky, like these just like basement operations, one person. You're kind of the middleman. You and Clara, it's like,
well, we're on this trajectory though, because definitely Penteract Press was a micropress.
Right.
Now we've moved up.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, well, I say hopefully continuing to go up, but then we have started this Penteract Editions imprint. So that's because we have a love for the smaller things, the nice pamphlet that has, as we said earlier, a coherent suite of poems that all fit together neatly as a crystal. So yeah, but one of the reasons that we did this with Penteract, and something you pointed out moments ago, is that people didn't tend to buy the leaflets too much. So you're doing this, and you know this full well. So you're doing this purely for the love of the form and for making things.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't put out a publication for a little while, and I guess I'm struggling right now with Simulacrum Press, thinking, will I do another one? Will I not? Because I love everything about it, except it's obviously very discouraging to publish something and then you only have a few purchased, and then you're thinking, well, that's not really fair to the author. What's the point then? Like, if people don't want to participate in this quote unquote community, well, don't push it,
Yeah, I know, and it's hard, and especially hard when that you could just put something very easily, just put something online, and far more people are going to see it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I mean, I've been struggling also with the idea of publishing in journals, and there's like the validity of or the weight of like a print publication versus an online publication. And it's all rather absurd. but still there, absurd as it is. And there's this like prestige in certain journals, right? You want to pretend that you're being successful, I guess.
Yeah. Well,
But
actually,
in the end,
I ignore this. I only submit to journals when I'm invited to. I don't send work to journals. I put it on Twitter instead.
yeah, the advent of social media has totally changed the whole concept of that. I mean, it's true. You don't have the same motivation to publish in journals if you can publish on social media.
Yeah. And when you're as impatient as I am, to be able to just put it online straight away is so much better than all the fucking waiting that goes on with journals. And the bigger the journal, the longer the wait.
Yeah, yeah. And then like, or if someone sends you a contract, it just feels like so overblown. It's just like, whatever. Who cares? Like, I get very nihilistic about the whole thing because it's like, there's certain bureaucracies, I guess, put in place to make it seem very legitimate and like to protect authors and publishers. But it's like, I don't know. Maybe on a certain level it matters, but certainly where I'm at, all I can think is who really cares? Like, just publish my work. If somebody steals it, whatever, like how much more luck are they going to have than me? As poets, we're just like the drivel, like that said, I think poetry is amazing and everyone should read it. And I love pursuing it, but you have I feel like you have to be realistic. And there's so much crap to cut through.
I'm assuming you saw that tweet. It was when I had gone to Wales for the week and I was getting away from everything. The first day that tweet went viral with I can't remember her name, the poet who said that poetry is an echo chamber and that it has no real impact on the rest of the world.
Was this something that you published? Or
it wasn't me.
No, it wasn't you. No.
It sounds like something I'd say, but
I don't know if I saw it. I missed the virus. I was lucky. Or I might have seen it, but just forgotten. That happens too.
I can probably find it for you. I'll show it to you because I think I should make this podcast more topical.
I love the most horrendous tweets. They're the best ones. I saw one yesterday. It was somebody, no idea who they are, which is what I hate about Twitter. You just get these tweets from like random people you're not even following. And she said, most poets aren't creative, controversial, but true. And it's just like, I don't know. Part of me wants to respond to that, and part of me feels like it's a complete waste of time. And the part that feels it's a complete waste of time won, which is probably for the best because you just end up feeling like a troll. But like, there's so much to be said to that. I guess in either direction. But like, you just can't help but feeling like, and you assume that you are one of the creative ones. That's, and who knows who you are.
Yeah, the arrogance of poets.
Yeah.
I've just sent you this tweet anyway.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
So this is Danielle Rose.
Okay. I wish poets understood that the general population has no interest in what we do. So when we speak, we are speaking only to each other. The delusion that poetry is something powerful is a straight line to all kinds of toxic positivities that are really just us lying to ourselves. So
the mob descended on her.
Oh yeah.
But it gains her 3,000 followers. I've said things just as bad as that, and nobody's made me famous.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's truth to that. There's truth to, we do no good in the world except to feel good about ourselves. There's some truth to that. But we got to keep the world turning, you know, and not like descend into absolute and utter nihilism, which is very hard, you know. What do you, how would you respond to that tweet?
Well, I would say it's a fair point. I'm not sure what toxic positivities means, but
No, that seemed very contradictory.
but it's true. It's true that poets we're not reaching a broad audience. So we're not really having a strong impact on the world in the way that some poets think they might be. So, for example, we're not stopping any wars. We're not.
Yeah, I don't know why
change.
people have this idea that like poetry should be an agent of change. It's strange to me. Like I'm writing a poem to change something. Why? Where does that come from? Like you can speak out against something, you can have a voice, but like it doesn't make sense to me that people use it as a platform for change. I don't know. it kind of befuddles me.
Well, I use it for the opposite reason. I think poetry is a nice way to escape from having to deal with all the horrors.
Well, wouldn't the opposite be to keep things the same, Anthony?
Yeah, I think if you really want to change the world, then you should be a politician rather than a poet.
Yeah, or at least
choose an art form with a bigger audience if you want to change the world.
Don't choose an art form. Don't do it through an art form. An art form, you know, come on. I think that what I've learned from my creative practices, it's just a way to learn how to live and to understand the world. And if other people take something from that learning of yours, that's great. But I don't expect to change anyone's life. I expect to change my own life, maybe, or at least guide it. And you know, does that put it into the category of masturbatory practice? You know, I don't think so. I think that the best that an art form can do is be an agent of learning.
Yeah, it could just be saying, "Hey, everyone, look at this cool thing I've discovered. Look, I've discovered you can do this with words. I've discovered you can do this with rubber stamps. Anything. Isn't this an interesting idea?"
But I mean, like, don't you feel like your artistic practice, which is an integral part of your life, teaches you about living? It does for me. It's a constant reflection on my own being.
I don't know if I'd phrase it that way, but I think I know what you mean.
Like for me, the more I pursue my work, well, it's just a constant conversation with my experience, you know, and trying to make sense of the spaces between people. And maybe that's a very specific thing to my practice, you know. Probably it is. But it's about this kind of like weird psychic space between people. And, you know, I find life very confusing. I'm sure most people do. But I don't know about that. I don't know what other people experience. I find people very opaque. And yet I know there are things going on between me and other people. There are relationships and exchanges, but none of it makes a lot of sense to me. It's so knotted. And so in my practice, I'm always kind of, not even intentionally, I've just come to recognize it, that I'm always entering that kind of space and revisiting those spaces. That is what my visual poetry is those spaces. And so for me, that's like, it's just an engagement in understanding life around me.
Well, I think there's a reason that art and religion have been so intertwined that there is some reaching towards the divine and seeing yourself as a speck in the cosmos and contemplating your place. And I think art does serve that purpose. It puts the world into perspective.
Yeah, well, it generally tries to make sense of what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Or at least attempt to articulate it in one medium or another. Like I think that I imagine it's what I experience is probably true for most people, that like there is a large experience of opaqueness. You know, it's like if there was this great transparency, we'd have peace on earth, right? Like we would just know, oh, like I understand why this person is doing this, and why would I want to hurt this person, and why would I react this way, or why are they reacting this way? We are so blind, right? We have no idea what each other's doing, and we just violently react to one another constantly. And I don't mean like large violences that you see, you know, I don't mean like the law and murder, and which happens obviously, but I just mean like our interactions are fairly violent on a small scale, on a very intense scale. Does that sound like extreme to you?
No, I don't think so. I think I know what you're getting at. But this all sounds like, so it's an individualistic thing though, rather than an attempt at complete global change. It's self-improvement. That's not a great term, but you know, it is that. But it's also showing people, it's showing other people what's possible. It's showing other people that I can live this way, and it's different from how you live. So it really emphasizes the difference between individuals and therefore the common ground. Is it fair to say that's sort of along the lines you're thinking?
I guess I just want to like illustrate the electricity between us, and then yes, I think that what you're saying makes sense. Yes, because I want to illustrate the electricity, and by like showing that electricity, that weird space between us, that should be a common ground. We all exist in that between space. We have vastly different experiences, but there's got to be some meeting points.
I asked you a stock first question, so I'm going to ask you a stock last question, which is,
okay,
what are you working on now, and not just now, but where do you see your practice going? What's next?
As I said, I'm working on another rubber stamp project, which is approaching completion. I wrote a novella last summer, and so that has just finished. A friend of mine just proofread that, and we're going to have a video call in the next week, and so I'll be re-engaging that work and hopefully getting it out into the world sooner than later. I don't know how much I'll have to change. I just finished up a manuscript called Empty Building, which you may have heard of. And that was revisiting work that I did starting in maybe 2017. I went back to it over maybe 3 years, continued doing work on that, and that was all visual work. The ink pad poems that I'd done before, that I've published some of them, but found that the work just as a visual sequence, the gallery in the book, wasn't very satisfying, and I've been wanting more of a relationship between visual work and traditionally written work, and so I wrote through those works and put together a manuscript which was very satisfying, and then very, very soon I'm just going to drop off the cliff of having nothing, because I've been working on all this stuff and it's all wrapping up, and I don't have another one to meet me. So I have to brace myself.
There's always going to be something. That's what I found. There's
Yeah,
never,
eventually.
yeah, it's impossible to not have at least one project going on.
Oh, well, I don't know. I don't know. Well, no, that's true. That's true. I have another thing, an older manuscript that is promising, and just thinking maybe I would revisit that. But it happens. It happens that you the stars align and you finish a few projects, and then there's just that vast blankness that can be, very difficult for artists.
I'd quite welcome it now. I think it'd be quite nice if I didn't have anything to work on.
That's a good place to be. I'm jealous of that. That's good. I should get closer to that somehow.
Sacha, we are at the end, and it's been really good. This has been a fun podcast, and we've covered hopefully nothing was too controversial.
I'm sure not. Poets have backbones.
Do they?
I don't know.
Some do.
Well, thanks a lot for doing this with me.
That was a lot of fun. And Jung Origami is available from Penteract Press, and everyone should go out and buy a copy.
I agree. It's full of those psychic spaces between people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sacha.
Thanks so much.
To discover more, visit us at penteractpress.com.